Welcome to the Behaviour Speak podcast. Now, here's your host, Ben Ryman.
Welcome to another episode of the Behaviour Speak podcast. Excited today to have Gabrielle Stigant with us in the virtual studio, and we're going to be talking about all things girls and autism today. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. Gab, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to chat about this.
Super pumped. So I wanted to start off, I've been kind of following the lead of a lot of different podcasts that kind of bring on folks with ABA, just kind of get a little bit of origin story on folks. I do know a tiny bit of your origin story because we met, almost 20 years ago when I first got into the field myself. But I know that there's been a divergent pathway for the two of us. So tell me a bit about how you kind of got into the ABA kind of field and working with folks with autism and how that kind of led you to where you are now.
So as you mentioned, after university, I graduated with my undergrad from UVic and I moved to the mainland, and that's where I met you and I started working at a group home. And then at the same time, I also started working with a young girl on her home ABA program. And at the time, she was about 3.5. And I really enjoyed seeing the progress she made, working as a team. I got to play. It was really fun. And so over the course of the year, I joined more home teams and worked myself out of the group home environment and continued to work with young kids. And then fast forward, I interned with a non-for-profit and did my master's at UBC. And while working at the non-for-profit, I had a lot of opportunities to not only program for early intervention, work with one-on-one with learners. I also got to facilitate and run social groups and summer camps. And I really enjoyed that. And so when the non-for-profit closed down and I started my private practice, between myself and a couple of other colleagues, was able to continue to offer and facilitate social groups. And so in my private practice, I've always continued to be able to include that piece that I've enjoyed.
Awesome. And that's kind of how I found you again, was when you kind of started doing these girls groups online when kind of COVID hit. And we're going to talk more about that a little bit later. There's a lot of differences between kind of girls and boys with autism. I've learned recently. You had sent me a bunch of articles a while back and on girls with autism, and I really kind of dove into them, and just a lot of things I had just no idea about. I'd always known that this whole idea of the boys to girl ratio of 4-to-1 was a bit skewed, maybe, and maybe not necessarily exactly what's happening, and that in fact there may be more girls with autism out there than we know, but it's kind of hard to find them. Why is that?
Yeah, so this leads to what we talked about earlier of masking and camouflaging. So a lot of girls are sort of hiding their, if you will, social struggles by learning different coping strategies to fit into the situation. And so I think unless folks are really understanding and seeing the underlying issues of what's going on a superficial level, many girls are fitting into the situation, and especially younger girls. And that kind of changes when the 8 to 9-year-old phase comes in play. So some girls who are younger and are quiet and not talking, they might be considered more shy. Maybe, they don't know how to seek out help, but instead of seeing that as the challenge, people are offering help because, that little girl's just shy. Or if conversing, one person I work with, if she struggled to keep up with the conversation or didn't understand the question that was asked, she learned to say, I don't really feel like talking about that right now. So in an appropriate way, was able to deflect the conversation and avoid it. So lots of other women and girls on the spectrum have learned how to cope by using masking or camouflaging traits by hiding their sort of autistic traits. So whether that's sort of self-stimming, that might help self-regulate. They might hide those because they're hyper aware that that's not what you're supposed to do, or could be, perceived as they notice that their peers are not doing those kinds of behaviors. They might find ways, they might mimic a girl, like if they see a girl that's really popular, they might mimic the way that her hair is or her clothing style and how she talks or her tone of voice. Some women have reported that they would practice conversations ahead of time so that when they're in the moment, they know what to say and how to navigate the situations. Younger girls might not necessarily understand the rules of the games, but if they imitate their peers' actions, they can fit in. So some girls have also reported of flitting, and research has showed like flitting from one group to another. So if you're the, recess supervisor and you're like, oh yeah, she's playing with friends, I see her. But she may be more on the periphery of the group and not actually involved with the activity.
I read about that term in one of the articles. What's flitting?
So you might go from the girls or the kids that are playing tag, and then maybe then you go over to the kids that are playing hopscotch, and then over to Foursquare. So you're constantly just going from one group to another just to see what's going on, but not becoming an active participant necessarily.
Just maybe trying to see where you can kind of maybe fit in the best.
Right. What's the easy way to fit in? And so, as I mentioned earlier, around 8 to 10, I sort of refer it to as the walk and talk stage. That's where girls on the playground are less likely to play tag and these sort of activities, and are more likely to start walking around and talking and sharing more of those social emotional pieces, their feelings or talking about others or their likes and dislikes. And so for girls who are struggling to keep up with those conversations, you can no longer mimic the actions. That's when sort of those challenges might appear to be a bit more obvious.
Yeah, because I guess there's a lot of really overt behaviors that they can just sort of copy. You're playing tag, so I can run around and tap, or I can run away, or there's really really obvious kind of things going on. But then when the girls get older, now it's about this sort of really quiet verbal behavior that you can't actually pick up on.
Right. And it's not even just verbal, right? It's the subtle social nuances. It's the look, the eye roll, the raised eyebrows, the body language, right? Just turning slightly. And so that's what, like the bullying, quote unquote, might not necessarily be intentional, but the girl that's not necessarily fitting into the group, the other girls, it might be more covert of just ignoring her or leaving her out, or even that's when some gossiping happens or spreading rumors.
Right.
So it's much more subtle than maybe the males. And so the other piece is a lot of girls on the spectrum tend to internalize those emotions. And so they sort of hold it together all day at school and then may come home and just fall apart. And because they're in their safety environment, right? And with their safe people, so they can have these meltdowns and let out all the emotions because they're struggling to keep it together all day. So the masking or camouflaging, as even I mentioned, like, mimicking a person's ways about them or pre-practicing those conversations. I mean, that's only going to get you so far. If the conversation doesn't go as you plan, you have to be able to alter, your way of thought, be flexible with what you're speaking about, even taking that perspective taking of reading the cues of others and altering your behavior accordingly, right?
And can they read the cues? Like, do they know what the eye roll means or the body turning means and all that sort of stuff?
I think that really depends from individual to individual. Definitely just in reading a lot of, Facebook pages and Instagram accounts of autistic women and the girls in particular that I've worked with, some of them recognize that they're different and recognize that they're not being accepted as much as their peers. So they are aware that there's a difference about them. Some of them may see those eye rolls or recognize they're not getting the response rate that they want, but they don't know why, what it is that they did that caused that. So that can be, and that again goes to that perspective taking, really reading and understanding the subtleties and what your behavior did to sort of cause that and how to change it.
Right. It's so interesting. So I suppose these kids are at school and they're doing the mask and the camouflage, they come over with a meltdown.
Mm-hmm.
If they've yet to be diagnosed, this must be so confusing to the parents and the families. Like, what's happening?
Right. So confusing for the family because they, what's changed, what's going on. The school team might not necessarily pick up on what the family is seeing. Because again, like they might superficially be seeing this young girl with other kids, but not recognizing that there may not truly be those friendship or relational interactions. And the masking or camouflaging might be hiding the struggles that this child is actually experiencing.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So why is it that it takes so long to either diagnose girls or that they don't even get diagnosed at all? Like, I still think this 4-to-1 ratio is maybe not so accurate. So
yeah, no, you're right. I think that one piece is that, they see children these girls are struggling at school. They might have some challenges with friendships, but they might be not, what am I trying to say? The professionals around might not necessarily see autism. Well, they make eye contact. They can converse with me. They can hold a conversation. Academically, they're fine. So there might be excuses for behavior. Well, she's just shy, or she's strong-willed. She has lots of ideas. So instead of sort of recognizing which might be more of the autistic characteristics, they're dismissed or seen as more other, gender specific traits. So definitely those are the challenges with, I think, the other professional or the other people in the life to sort of think in that direction. Many girls then get misdiagnosed with anxiety or depression, amongst other diagnoses. And so autism is not necessarily on the forefront. Sometimes, like, even when we look at, girls don't necessarily have as many stereotypical behaviors that boys might present because of the camouflage and masking. They're learning to hide it. Or those special interests, it might not be about dinosaurs specifically, but it might be more about a TikTok person knowing every little detail about a particular TikTok person, right? Or maybe her favorite color is pink and everything in her life is pink. And that might be her specific interest. But, she's a girl. She likes pink. What's the big deal?
Right. She likes TikTok.
Yeah. Or she's really into horses. Right. So the special interests might be more acceptable and not seen again as an autistic trait.
Now, what about, like, I could see that totally with like a 7, 8, or 9-year-old, but what about the 3-year-olds? Like, what's happening there?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that the behaviors there are still fitting in with their peers, if you will. Like they might not be as obvious. But there might be more sensitivities to, light or sound or clothing textures. There might be maybe some like picky eating, but again, is that being 3? Right. So I think, there might be more red flags, but because girls again are tending to be diagnosed much later, I don't think there's not research there to demonstrate or to flag for these younger children.
You mentioned, I was reading one of the articles you sent me, I can't remember which one it was, but there was something about that you just touched on where they kind of get diagnosed with something else first.
Yeah.
And they talked about I'll share all these articles in show notes. And there was one article in particular that I think was more of a narrative than a research kind of paper. And it was just sort of telling stories of several girls with autistic girls with autism. And one of them recounted their story of how they had been through, I think it was 12 psychiatrists and 7 or 8 different diagnoses. And like you said, they're really good at remembering specific details about those psychiatrists, like in so much detail. Like that was their special interest because they're exposed to so many psychiatrists. And so there was one where I remember when psychiatrist 1 was fired from their job for sleeping with their patients. and psychiatrist number 3, gave me a lot of drugs. But that she in particular went through. She had an anxiety disorder diagnosis.
Yeah.
She had borderline personality disorder, and the problem with depression, and the problem with a lot of those diagnoses is they usually coincide with prescriptions and medications, and sometimes really strong, really powerful medications that tend to mess people up even more. And so, it's one thing to sort of have the parents not be able to pick up on, or the school staff not to be able to pick on it. But when the clinicians and the diagnostic professionals can't pick up on it, like what's happening?
Yeah, it's pretty scary. I think the challenge is that there hasn't been enough research. There hasn't been enough, education to people about what girls, how they present. And so I think now that more and more, particularly women when they're older, are getting diagnosed and sharing their stories and reflecting on their childhoods, that hopefully that will help bring light and educate everyone on what to sort of look for so that these girls aren't overlooked. And even, I'll be honest, some of the girls that I work with and I meet with, I'll have their diagnostic reports, but it really takes me a number of one-to-one time to really pinpoint what the challenges are and what we need to work on. And, cause I'll be like, okay, well, let's talk about this. Let's talk about that. Okay. She gets that. She understands that. Okay. Well, and it really requires me to build a rapport and trust for these girls to then, to drop the mask, to stop camouflaging. Right. And so that's me spending quite a bit of time with one person one-on-one. But when you're going in for an assessment, these clinicians don't get that time.
Right. Yeah. That's a really good point. Do you think that, and maybe this is exactly how is what you just said to me, but that the testing is actually kind of more geared towards boys?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that it's there are a number of clinicians now who are recognizing maybe how to alter it a bit or what to look for necessarily. I know one person was telling me that, during when the clinician was talking to the girl, like again, was able to mask and camouflage and hold it together. And then as soon as she left the room, was able, like the emotions bubbled up and she fell apart into her mom's arms. And if the clinician hadn't seen that, then she may not have gotten a diagnosis.
Wow, that's interesting. So really maybe speaks to how some changes need to kind of happen in the whole diagnostic process. And I guess more research, like you said, there just isn't enough of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that helping clinicians understand of what to look for and how it's going to impact women who have diagnosis of autism and are on the spectrum to get that support that they need. And because, research has shown that masking and camouflaging can really have an impact on people's mental health and their self-perception. So there has been, daily exhaustion from keeping this mask up can lead to an increase in anxiety and depression. And many people, question their self-worth, or, do these people like me because of the mask, of like how I present, or do they like me for who I truly am? So hopefully, as more and more people are aware and more girls are getting earlier diagnosis, that will help many women in the long run. And, and I'm not, camouflaging and masking is not specifically to women. There are definitely men on the spectrum who mask and camouflage as well. And someone, a colleague mentioned that it's not, we all mask, we all camouflage. Right? We're different when we're on a podcast than we are at home without anyone watching us.
Absolutely.
But we don't have to be as conscious, right? And people are really conscious of masking and hiding their autistic traits to fit in.
And there seems to be almost, this is a bit of a tangent, but there seems to be like a parallel here with, masking and code switching, which is something code switching. So this is a term I've learned recently, that a lot of folks in a lot of folks in Black communities engage in this thing called code switching, which, and forgive me if anyone's listening if I'm sort of butchering this term, but as I understand it, I just did an interview, which I don't know how the timeline will work out. This may end up being before or after that one, but with a BCBA in Africa, in Botswana, and she was talking to me about she had quite a lot of world travels in terms of where she kind of practiced ABA, and she worked in the States, she worked in Ireland and Kuwait and Dubai and South Africa, and now finally in kind of her home country of Botswana. But she found, as she went from kind of country to country, the cultures were so different, and the way to engage in things was so different, like that she had to do this thing called code switching to kind of try to fit in with each different culture. And then similarly, I've heard a lot. There's actually I think it's actually called Code Switch. There's a podcast that's really awesome. And essentially, Black folks, in North America, a lot of them are constantly doing this code switching thing, which is essentially a masking and basically trying to sort of fit into, colonial kind of expectations of people, like everything from, how they speak and tones of voice, dress, hairstyles. So you might find someone who normally has dreadlocks, just styling their hair straight, or you might find there's lots of dialects and lingo and different things within different communities that that are part of culture and tradition, but they'll just sort of move that aside and kind of talk suit and tie American in order to fit in because of racism and basically pride. And again, I'm so new to learning sort of this whole area, but essentially. And some of this kind of came out with the first episode we did with Danielle, where, she wouldn't have opportunities if she didn't first kind of code switch. She would lose opportunities, lose chances to network because we have all these sorts of implicit biases about how, Black folk are supposed to be, and most of them negative, probably all of them negative, and not really accurate to, the type of folks they are. And so this code switching thing is huge. And it sounds just like masking, to try to kind of bring it back. Is that's essentially what kind of what these folks.
Well, interesting. Like I remember listening to that podcast with Danielle, and the two of you did talk about code switching. I just forgot the terminology, and it did make me think of masking in people on the spectrum. So, yeah, very similar. It's a form of protection. Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, interesting. And I look forward to your other podcast. That sounds interesting too.
Thank you.
If you're planning on collecting continuing education units for this podcast episode, you can purchase them at www.cbiconsultants.com. You'll also need to know the 3 secret words. The first secret word is masking.
Yeah, and interesting when you start to talk about sort of that fellows do it too. There's one fellow in particular that I had worked with a couple of years back, and he masks, but it was actually ingrained in by his parents,
right,
to mask. And they basically said, Bob, and I'm using a pseudonym, Bob, don't rock and hand flap in front of people, or you will be bullied and made fun of, and you won't be cool. Yeah. And it was almost kind of a sort of a punishment paradigm that was kind of put into place, or negative reinforcement, I guess. And so, I worked with him for years, and never, I caught, little sorts of indicators that he was autistic, but a lot of the stuff he was just, he came out as kind of a regular guy. And then it was one day that I went to pick him up at his house to go out and do something. I heard a sound in the backyard, and it was a vocalization, right? Sort of an ooey kind of sound that he was making, a kind of a guttural sound that he was making. And I was like, "What's that?" And kind of tiptoed around, and he was jumping on a trampoline in his backyard, and making these sounds and kind of hand flapping and doing all this stuff that I had never seen him do before.
Right.
And he had basically been taught by his caregiver, you do that stuff at home when no one's looking. And so he would mask all day and then come home and not melt down, but he would just come home and engage in all of the stereotypy, which I don't know that I even like that term. It sort of makes it sound like it's a bad thing right away when we call it that.
Yeah. But it's been building up all day because he hasn't been able to engage. And then, and I don't think that your Bob friend, I don't think that's uncommon. I think that's quite common for many, many autistic people, unfortunately.
Yeah. Wild. So maybe to start to kind of bring it to some of the work you're doing now with girls. And this is what really kind of stood out for me. I like to interview folks that I hear just doing things I haven't seen before. And I've definitely seen folks doing social groups, and you mentioned that before, that you've done some. And I know, there's, particularly in the States, Ashley Rose there does with Mission Cognition. She's been doing some really kind of cool, kind of just general social groups and virtual stuff.
Yeah.
And she actually started a podcast of her own to kind of share that stuff. But what we haven't seen much of anything is girls only groups. We'll see lots of boys groups, or we'll see mixed groups, girls and boys kind of together. So maybe a couple questions. Why just girls groups? And why not, multi, boys and girls groups, sort of number one. And two, kind of how'd you, which is that's kind of maybe the part two of the next question, which is, how did you start kind of doing these? Like, how'd you get into doing girls groups?
Well, I think I'll be answering your questions at the same time.
Okay.
So when I started my private practice, and I was still running, I still had a group going on, and it was a mix of boys and girls. And they were probably about between like around 9 or 10 years old. And that's when I started to see a difference in behavior. And I felt that I was spending more of my focus and energy in the group on the boys, because their behaviors were bigger and louder and more overt. And the girls, weren't necessarily getting the same level of my attention. And they were coming with different questions and different attitudes, frankly. The boys that were coming were a bit more neutral about being there, whereas the girls were really excited to be there. They wanted to be there. They wanted to feel inclusive and connect with the other girls. So I actually had to do a little bit of research here, Ben, to see what date this was. So in 2017, I just happened to have a few girls that were of similar age and cognitive and communication levels. So we formed our own group. And so we started a girls group. And I was at that time advertising and letting other clinicians know and trying to reach out. I think part of the challenge, though, is that, again, even though it was just a short time ago, there just weren't as many girls around that were being diagnosed. So that was the other challenge. It's much easier to form a group with boys, or boys and girls, because when you're putting together a social group, you're trying to find the right mix of kids, right? So that they have similar skill base and are able to connect, maybe have similar ages and similar interests if possible. And so there just isn't as big of a pool of neurodiverse girls to come together. So, so we continued our group, and then just, I guess last year, in 2019, I had 2 groups running and was just about to start a third group of younger girls when COVID hit. And as you mentioned, mission cognition, I turned to them to figure out what I was going to do virtually. And through their support and education, was able to start up a bunch of virtual groups. And that, again, has been able to, I've got girls Zooming in from all over the province, from smaller communities that just there's just not that pool of girls, right? to come together and to connect with. Even in group this week, one of the girls said, yeah, I know a lot of other people with autism, but they're all boys. So, and that was in her small community. And so, so I think that, as hard as it has with COVID and as hard as it has been going virtually, it's really made me recognize the need and I've just been able to offer so many more groups because of it.
I really like what you said kind of at the beginning when you're starting to sort of match folks and you're looking for folks either similar age, cognitive level, communicative level, maybe even interests, and really trying to kind of find that right mix. And I think that's a really important piece that I think is left out. I think we often, and what those girls said right there, that girl said to you right there, about sort of, they're all boys. And I think we often group folks together solely based on diagnosis. Well, you all have autism, you're all autistic. So we should just put you all together and do an intervention. I know that place that you and I kind of first started at was, it was mayhem. Because basically what the model was to bring in not only random people with autism from different parts of the province of different genders and different levels and different functioning, but they were also all on the severe level of problems. And so, most of them probably a lot of them didn't have communicative skills or any of those sorts of things. And so then we try to put together activities and outings and all these sorts of things. And quite often they'd fail because, people just triggered each other over and over and over again. And so I think this is a key piece. So I'm guessing you don't just take anybody.
No. So I have a fairly thorough intake process. And I would say that this, I have learned over the years of running social groups. So I always first connect with the parents to hear what their goals are for why they want their girl to participate, what their goals are. To be honest, Ben, most often it's, I want her to have friends. I want her to connect with other girls and to feel accepted. That seems to be the main theme and goal of a lot of the parents that I talk to or caregivers that I speak to. And then it used to be an in-person assessment, but now because of COVID, it's down to a Zoom session where we connect. I connect with the girl, and we have a brief discussion and interaction. And the other piece is that the girls that participate want to be there. If they're not intrinsically motivated to be a part of the group, then they shouldn't be there. Right? So I think that's the other key piece, because if you have someone in the group that doesn't want to be there, it really throws off the whole dynamic. So and then I run my groups on the semester system. So usually it's around 8 to 12 weeks. If it's a group where I'm a little unsure, then I might suggest to parents, let's run it on maybe a month basis and see how it goes. And if those the group participants aren't clicking, then it's nice because I now have the ability to make some alterations and switch things up. So it's been really nice. Definitely. I mean, we're coming up to almost a year, and it's given me more insight in following these groups, because when I was in person, we'd meet every 2 weeks for a couple of hours, just based on the activities that we did. But from doing the online, we're meeting on a weekly basis for 1 hour. And one thing that brought insight to me, just doing this COVID on virtual online piece, was that it takes about 4 weeks for us to get into a groove. And for the girls to actually get to the point where they feel comfortable with each other and connect. And, even this past week for 2 of my groups, because I never mention diagnoses,
right?
But in both groups, it was interesting. One participant said, I have autism. Does anyone else?
Right on.
And the conversations, I just let the conversations flow, and they all disclosed their diagnoses and were able to relate to each other. But they had all been together, for 4 to 5 weeks straight and had formed a connection. Right. And so it's sort of, once we have that connection, that then we can build more skills and more trust, and the masking is, lessened.
Sure.
Interestingly enough, that was one of the conversations they also talked about was their masking. Yeah, it was quite interesting to just be a fly on the wall and listen to their conversation. I mean, I wasn't, they knew I was there present, but they openly talked about that. I was really proud of them.
Were they all completely shocked that they all had autism?
No,
being that this is an autistic girls group.
Well, I call it a group for neurodiversity.
Right.
So so they all know that, there's whether girls participate because of anxiety or ADHD or autism, right? They don't know specifically. And because I don't specifically announce or say, they're seeking that clarification themselves.
That's awesome. I love how they just kind of made that connection, because that's a much better way to do it, for sure.
Yeah, it was really
so
cool.
And interesting, just hearing you kind of interchange a lot of terms there. So I've heard you say, the girls say, I have autism. Does anyone else? I'm neurodiverse. Are you? I'm autistic. Are you? Do you find, lately I've been trying to, learn more from autistic folk, but there are, at least in sort of the social media kind of circles, and that's really all I'm exposed to. I live in a super rural part of the world, and so I'm not really exposed to a lot of autistic folk on a regular basis. And certainly when I was, these labels weren't really talked about as much. And in fact, the term autistic was kind of taboo.
Yeah.
It was always person with sort of language, people with language. These are what the employers taught you to say, and so on and so forth. Neurodiversity, that's a really new term, I think, at least in sort of mainstream now. But the message I was getting sort of from the social media kind of side of things was that, we prefer autistic, and I would say most of us prefer autistic. Do you see that, or do you see the variety there?
With social media, I think, like you, they prefer, folks are saying they prefer autistic, but I also see many, because I follow more women on the spectrum, and I find a lot of the folks that I'm following are saying, ask the individual. I think that the girls that I work with are still young. I haven't asked them, my groups, directly what their preference are. They certainly referred to themselves as having autism, but that also could be because of the language that's been modeled for them.
Of course, yeah.
And they're still growing and developing their, thoughts and opinions, and recognizing what being autistic, means for them.
Yeah.
So I guess for me, it's ask the person if possible.
No, I totally agree. Yeah. I mean, I think that makes sense. I mean, everyone's got a preference for different things, and you kind of got to go that direction. But it's just interesting to know that, and it can depend on age, it can depend on sort of a lot of those pieces. Kind of two really opposite directions I kind of want to go with questions here. So I'm just trying to decide which one. Maybe I'll come back to the second part. I wanted to talk about the skills and whatnot. I mean, you say most of the parents' goals is that, I want my daughter to have friends. I want my kid to have friends. And I think that's a common thing, across boys and girls. That's in the end, that's the primary goal. I want, either some level of independence, but more so, a circle of support, a circle of friends. That's not that simple. Okay, they're in a group. We'll now be friends.
Yeah. No, that's not how friendship works.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you get there? How do you get autistic kids to develop friendships?
The second secret word is social.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so I think that, again, it's really going to depend on the individual. I've talked to some families, and I can't quote, I don't remember the article because I'm not very good with names, but I might have sent it to you, where it really talked about companionship versus friendship.
Yes.
And so for some children who may struggle more with the conversation piece or the social emotional piece, it might be a good area to focus is finding, what your girl is interested in, and then finding an activity with other peers. So she has a companion, she's part of the group, and that might be enough for her. Versus girls who are seeking more of the friendship level, the more intimate connection, then it's helping to support how do you evolve those friendships. And I've had lots of caregivers say, yeah, my girl's great at making friends. It's hard to keep them. And so the one piece about, attending a group once a week, or even going to school with the same people every day, friendships evolve outside of those sort of structured activities. So whether it's through texting, whether it's through phone calls or hanging out, so it's helping your daughter really develop those skills of, because many have said, like, out of sight, out of mind. Right. So, hey, it's your friend's birthday coming up. Let's send her a text. Let's give her a phone call. You really connected with this person. Let's set up, well, I guess now because of COVID, let's hang out and go for a walk. Right. So that they're still connecting, but outside of that structured piece, and allowing the friendship to grow and evolve.
And is that something you're doing in your groups? Are you sort of facilitating that sort of in between weeks?
Yeah. So for my groups, we form a group chat. So that's to try and encourage some texting in between. I will, I do weekly homework, which is, it's fun stuff, like make a yummy dessert and send me a picture, or watch a movie and tell me what you watched. So I'll send the homework reminders through text. It's interesting to see, like, some girls are more participatory in the text messaging, where they'll send, hey, look at what I made on the weekend. And then some will respond. And then others, I think part of, those executive function challenges of sitting down, looking at your phone, thinking of a response, and being on top of those pieces, they may need more parental support in following through with that piece.
Are you finding, so you do like a group for 8 to 12 weeks. What happens after that?
So each semester, so I'll run groups that go from like September till Christmas, and then January to spring break, and then spring until the end of school. And then I'll look to do something in the summer. So there's usually just like 1 or 2 week break between each group. And that's really when I'll find out who wants to return. And if that group was working, I try to keep them the same. Maybe there might be like one new participant.
Yep. Yep.
And I try to form the group so that, and I only have 1 or 2 new people per group. Groups, again, I form them, especially with online platform. I keep them small. That was, right at COVID, I had combined, and I think we had like 6 to 8 participants. And one of the girls said, yeah, I don't get to talk enough. It's too big. So now a maximum of 4. And some of my groups, I just have 2 participants because of the particular goals that they're working on and because of their own social anxiety.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool that they're individualized and customized that way. I think that's awesome. So what other kinds of areas do you guys focus on in the groups, or girls focus on in the groups?
Well, so research has suggested that the areas to focus on specifically for girls are puberty and hygiene related issues, including sexual health.
Okay. Yeah.
Relationships, so understanding female friendships, and also eventually, again, this goes with the sexual health, understanding romantic and sexual relationships. A lot of research has supported that many autistic women, and probably autistic men too, have been, taken advantage of or have gotten themselves into situations that they didn't know how to get themselves out of. Yeah. And then the other piece is really the social emotional learning. So within my groups, we focus a lot on that social emotional piece, identifying, hey, I was feeling crummy today. This is why, learning to share, identify your emotions and sharing. A lot of the girls that I work with want to focus more on the positives. Oh no, I was fine. Today was good. Yep, no problems. So really, one, helping them be a bit more open to identifying those negative feelings and being open to talking about it. And I find that by having those peer models, other girls in the group saying that they've had worries and that they were feeling a bit anxious has really sort of allowed permission for other girls to slowly start to recognize and share those emotions as well. Yeah, so we work on that. We work on problem solving. I often sort of present a hypothetical question to the group. And we, with saying like there's not one solution, how can we come up with multiple? And that really does lead into the perspective taking piece, because often the girls have different ways that they would maybe broach the problem and their thoughts of how one solution might have different social consequences than the other. We work on just, going with the flow. I work on that myself because often I come in with my planned events and things will definitely go sideways. I like to follow their leads. So if they come to the group with a topic of interest or something that they want to address, then we go there. We talk about it. When we were in person, I guess that was over a year ago, that one girl was talking about going to a school dance. And saying, like, why do all the boys stand on one side of the room and the girls stand on the other? And she sort of had the impression that she couldn't dance unless a boy asked her or unless she, right? And so then we talked about, how you dance in a group with both boys and girls. And then what does that group dancing look like? And how do you join that group? Because she sort of stepped up and went right in the middle of the group. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, you can't do that. First you go on so those really subtle social nuances, right? So being able to practice that in the moment. And so as I say, going with the flow.
Yeah. Have you, I'm not sure how to word this question. Have you had folks in your group, that maybe identify differently from sort of a gender diversity kind of perspective?
I've talked to some girls who have considered joining my group and recognizing that, certainly we would welcome, the group would welcome that. We've had some girls who might, but it wasn't talked about. If it came up in conversation, certainly. And if I had enough participants, I mean, I think too, I would need to educate myself more.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I would say like there's certainly my groups consist of like one, I have a participant who has a boyfriend and another participant who's like completely not interested in anything romantic.
Yeah.
But we're able to talk about that. There's another girl who's shared like she thinks she's gay, but she's not sure. So certainly that has come up, but it hasn't been like the whole focus of a intense conversation, if you will.
Right. No. And I just, I mean, this is definitely another area that's, for great reasons, getting a lot more. It's important to sort of just, educate folks on that stuff, and especially when they're younger. And I often see how do we teach girls and boys about pronouns and different things like that, sort of those sorts of things. So I had just sort of kind of wondered, had that kind of come up at all?
Yeah, it has, but it's in a very accepting manner, not in a right. I think, to be honest, probably the girls in my group are more advanced than I am, and I learn from them.
No doubt. Yeah.
But yeah, I do acknowledge that I definitely need to do more education on my part.
Yeah. Kind of going back to puberty, I think we kind of just kind of glossed over that. We got to teach puberty and hygiene. Well, these are areas that I think can be super problematic for for families and teachers and whatnot, and hygiene, and there's a lot of skills there. I mean, I think many kids, autistic or not, don't realize regular bathing is important, and other sorts of things. You can smell bad and what that can mean, and so how do you approach that?
Yeah, so that is definitely I don't like showers. I don't want to shower. I don't want to wear deodorant. Bras are uncomfortable. Yeah. I mean, really in a group setting, there's only so much that I can do. Yeah. So really, I facilitate a conversation, and I provide the perspective taking of, because I'm not in the position to say you have to, like, this is right. Like that's up to the caregivers and the parents. But I take more of the angle of like, well, let's think about it. Like let's say you're sitting in class and the person next to you smells. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? What can you do? Now, what if somebody has that impression about you? So really helping them understand, like, if you choose to do this, that's fine, but here's the social ramifications. Here might be the thoughts and perspectives of your peers. And it's come to a point where the girls are like, I don't like it either, like providing the platform for them to talk about. And the reasons why, I'll say, well, okay, why? Why don't you like going in the shower? What's the challenge with that? What are some alternatives? So, because I think that having that information coming from peers is going to be, and research has shown, is going to be more impactful than coming from nagging parents, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So we've talked about, I mean, particularly right now, it's sort of all we can do is talk, right? Back when we were in person, we did practice like putting pads on by just having giant underwear that we'd put over our pants, and practice, putting pads on, taking pads off. What do you do when your pad is dirty and maybe you can't, problem solving? Like, let's think about this. What if there's no garbage in the bathroom? What are you going to do? So we talked about that and role played that. And again, I take the angle more of not me telling them, but helping them sort of come up with some solutions on their own.
Totally. Like, I wonder about kind of this, the sensory kind of piece there. And I heard you mention things like, I don't like wearing a bra. Well, I mean, and I know women in general have often said that bras aren't the most comfortable thing to wear, depending on, the material and whatnot. Are there sort of clear kind of sensory things going on for folks with, a lot of this stuff, and have folks come up with their own, kind of strategies to kind of mitigate that, or materials or.
Yeah, I think it hasn't necessarily come up in my groups. Certainly I've talked more with parents individually. I do follow a Facebook group that's women, autistic women and caregivers of autistic girls. And I find that Facebook group very insightful and helpful. Yeah. I mean, I think now, there's a lot more options. There's not just the underwire bra anymore. So there's a lot of other options to help to maybe slowly sort of move in that way. And honestly, in following the group, I remember one woman's like, well, why does she need to wear a bra? And I sort of had that aha moment. I'm like, yeah, fair point. Why? so I think that it's the individual and the values of the family and helping to figure that piece out.
Yeah.
I think some of the other challenges that come up just in regards to the hygiene and the puberty piece is the executive functioning piece. Knowing when to go and change your pad.
Right.
Knowing when to expect your period to start. Yeah. So there's some of those other sort of challenges that sometimes aren't always considered.
Yeah, absolutely.
Along with the sensory pieces.
You talked a lot about the different autistic women that you follow. Like, I guess you mean on social media?
Yeah, YouTube and Facebook and Instagram.
And so who do you recommend?
You're gonna ask me for names now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I might have to. No. There's a woman named, I think she goes by Yosemite Sam.
Oh, okay.
I really like her. Neurodivergent Rebel.
Okay.
Who else is there that I mentioned? The Facebook group. Yeah. There's a woman on TikTok, Paige Lale. Have you? I don't know if you've seen her, but she's been quite pronounced in social media recently.
Okay.
Sort of saying, this is what autism can look like. Yeah. There's who else is there? There's I think her name's Princess Aspian. Yeah, I'm finding there's more and more autistic women that are definitely sharing their stories, and which I find really helpful. And
absolutely.
And it was interesting because even in group this past week, a lot of girls, my participants said, "Can I share a book? It's written by an autistic girl." And then they all said, "Oh, I want to go get my book." And they all shared different books that they had found useful. So that was really great.
Oh, really cool.
Yeah.
Really
Yeah.
cool.
One that I like that was written by an autistic girl named Sienna Castellan. I don't know if I butchered her last name. Anyways, it's called The Spectrum Girls Survival Guide. And so that one's been a really good one. A lot of the girls in my groups have enjoyed it. And nice. Even for some of my one-to-ones, we use it as a platform of discussion. And for younger girls, there's a great book called I Am an Aspie Girl by, again, I'm going to butcher it, Danuta Bulcock Patterson. And it's a picture book, and it really outlines some, key pieces of autism. Again, I use that with some of my younger girls to help them understand their diagnosis.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You just mentioned one-to-one there. So I guess your job isn't just doing girls groups all the time.
No, I still do the early intervention or the home programming for the babies. But I also do provide one-on-one consult services with clients themselves and with the families.
And is that generally girls?
No, I do work with some boys as well. Yeah.
But you do get to work on some of these things with one-to-one with girls.
Yeah. And so that, could be because there's some things that just can't be addressed in the group and require more in a one-to-one situation. but then allowing opportunities to then generalize skills or practice skills in the groups. So there's a bit of that crossover.
That's cool. So have you seen any evidence of these girls continuing to connect with each other outside of the groups beyond like the texting between the weeks? So like once the 12 weeks are over, do you?
It really depends on the personality and the age.
The third secret word is girls.
Mm-hmm.
So actually just recently, especially now with more of the online gaming platforms where you can like friend request, that seems to happen more in like particularly this year, just because I think everybody's gaming a bit more. So that has happened. I know a couple of my participants have connected outside of groups and have made that effort to connect. In the past, when we were able to still kind of meet up in person, we'd do some monthly sort of park meetups when we could. And I think that helped, not just because the other piece is with this online platform, the parents don't get to connect. Right. Whereas when they were in person and parents were doing drop off and pickup, then they themselves could connect.
Could do some interaction.
Right. To help support their girls in connecting outside of group. So that I think helped a little bit when we could have those monthly meetups. But again, it really depends on each individual girl. And it does follow that sort of out of sight, out of mind for some of them.
Well, and then there's that other piece which you touched on during COVID. Since you've been doing the virtual groups, you've got folks now from all over the province.
Yes.
Kind of connecting. And so that's different. I mean, obviously awesome for, someone in Williams Lake or something that, not only doesn't have anyone else with autism to hang out with, but just doesn't have anyone, period.
Yeah. Yeah. We have recently, I've facilitated sort of some Friday evening Zoom events to try and continue and also to have a little bit of like crossover between groups. So we recently played Among Us.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I know that game.
Yeah. So I'm still horrible at it, but yeah.
Oh yeah.
So we've done some of that. And some of the girls have actually asked like after the group that they don't want to leave. Yeah. And so I'll just turn my camera and my microphone off so that they can continue
right on.
To interact.
Cool.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. But I find that it's after they've established probably the 5-week mark.
Yeah. You had talked about another goal of yours was to work on self-advocacy with these folks. What's that look like?
Yeah. So I think for part of the challenge, I help them, the girl, how should I put this? So part of when we're doing that problem solving piece, I do encourage the girls to help recognize, what's hard and challenging for them. Or even when we're working on conversations, I just put it out there and I said, for some of you, like who finds it hard to ask questions? And I might have a couple put their hand up and I said, okay, and who has a hard time sharing information about themselves? And the rest of the group puts their hand up. So providing opportunities to recognize in themselves what can be difficult. And then, okay, so how could you, help people understand that when you're in a situation? I have one person who has some anxiety. And so she always says like, can I just watch first to see how this activity is played and then I can participate? And I'm like, yeah, sure. That's totally fine. Thank you for asking.
Right.
And
that's awesome.
Yeah. And so providing opportunities for them to practice that skill and to self-advocate. Yeah. So, and then supporting each other we were talking about partners, like finding a partner at school or a group to work with. And all of them just hate that. Right. Yeah. What if I go up and people say no? What do I do? Or, nobody ever wants to be partners with me. I'm the last person to be picked. And so we had that conversation of like, can you go up to your teachers and talk to your teachers about how that's hard for you, and what could your teachers do to help support you in that situation?
Totally. I mean, I think the key piece here that you've just done so well of making it happen is that you've created such a safe place for these girls to kind of open up and, like I said, drop the mask and just have, like, it's got to be so amazing for a girl to be able to say, you know, I don't feel comfortable playing this game, or I don't like going up to people, and have 3 other girls say the same thing. Like what a power that has, that you can't replicate in kind of any other setting.
Yeah. No, you're right. And it's nice because, you know how on the Zoom calls, like you can see when people join before you've started the meeting.
Yeah.
I often see the girls joining. And I'm like, oh, okay, 15 more minutes and then group starts, right?
Awesome.
So it's really nice to see the eagerness there, or even the text messages of like, see you guys at group this afternoon.
Totally.
So that, I think that speaks volumes, it makes me recognize that I'm doing something right.
Yeah. You almost got to do what you do at the end of the groups at the beginning, and sort of a 10 minutes of no gab pre-social or something.
Yeah. It's interesting because I have done that, but I think part of the challenge for some of them is not knowing how to start the conversation. So I think,
yeah, for sure.
I think because I provide a little bit of structure and that facilitation helps, and then I can fade myself back. But I think one of the biggest pieces that I've learned over the years is being flexible. And so, you know, if they start a conversation and it's going off about maybe not a topic I intended, I really try to sit back and let them lead it, and then jump in when there's like that lull, or it's maybe becoming inappropriate. Or
yeah. So your groups are obviously always full. I mean, I know sometimes you only have 2 people in them. And so I imagine there's folks out there that are, you know, wanting to put their girls in a group, and well, you aren't available. Is there anyone else doing anything like this at all, even like in Canada and BC? I mean, that's available. I mean, I know it won't be the same thing, but is there anything else out there?
I know there's a couple of clinicians and local clinics that have created maybe like a one-off group.
Right.
And I mean, there's certainly, I've noticed more over the past years, community centers offering girls groups, not specifically for neurodiverse girls, but really focusing on, I think the YMCA puts one on, like really developing self-confidence. And there's definitely like some sexual health and groups that have been formed. And of course, there's always, you know, Girl Guides and Brownies and those pieces, those, you know, groups that are out there. So I think there's more and more just in general. But as far as I think there are more girls groups that are specifically being formed by like BCBAs and SLPs. I think we will see more of them in the coming years.
Good. Well, hopefully some will listen to this and start some themselves as well. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, actually, I was talking to a woman in Scotland because she was forming a girls group.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, so we were connecting over Zoom and chatting about it.
That's so great. I for folks that are listening right now, you might start to hear some sounds in the background, and so I think it's a good sign that maybe we'll start to wrap it up here, because I feel like the room I'm in is going to get really loud soon.
Yeah, I think my family's going to be home soon. So.
No, that's right. You were saying that too. Yeah. For those that are listening, I'm currently sitting in a fire department, and so that's a whole other story for another day. But I think some members are now out of the trucks, so I was able to avoid them all morning until now. Just kind of before we kind of end this here, I'm just curious about sort of a couple of things. We've definitely shared a lot of resources, but are there any things you might want to just kind of let folks know about, you know, working with girls with autism, or any resources out there, or any sort of just, you know, tips that would make folks think a little more?
I think definitely follow other autistic women through social media. I think that has provided me a lot of insight. There's a great book called Queen Bees and the Wannabes, or And it's actually, the movie Mean Girls was based off of it.
Oh, okay.
It's by Rosalind Wiseman, and she really outlines just the female friendship dynamic. I think that it's important to understand what that looks like in order to support the autistic girl in navigating that social piece. There's a lot more books out there, I find, of like novels and girls' experiences, which the girls in my groups have recommended and they've enjoyed. And so I just read as many books as I can and research what I can. So, yeah.
I know, and I don't want to put you on the spot because I know you, but I'm going to. But,
Okay.
but because I know you struggle with the research, and I'm not looking for you to name an article for me or anything. I mean, that'd be mean. But a lot of the research you sent me was, somewhat outside of the kind of the ABA realm.
Yeah.
It was, more kind of autism journals, molecular autism. They're amazing articles, and some of them actually do speak to considerations for behavioral treatment and that sort of thing. Are you aware of anybody that's doing kind of research with girls and ABA at all, or women, or in general? Or
there's a couple of women down in Kansas who are running a research-supported group, Girls Night Out.
Oh, yes.
Renee Jameson and I forget her colleague's name. They came and spoke actually on on Autism Community Training website.
Yep.
There's a slew of videos from presenters that came in 2018, including Dr. William Mandy from the UK. He's done a lot of work on camouflaging.
Oh, okay, cool.
And then a psychologist who came out east named Dori Zenner. She's worked with neurodiverse individuals through one-on-one and family.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so she has a lot of information. What else? Yeah,
No, that's
okay.
Good. That's a good start. Thank you. That's all I need, and I'll go look up the Girls Night Out and find out the other names and stuff.
Yeah.
No, just because I think we need more research,
and that's what it comes down to, Ben, is that there needs to be more research. And there's the Peers program has been run with both girls and boys, but I don't think there's any research that supports an all girl group doing the Peers program.
No, that'd be interesting to see, just to have someone just try doing that. Peers is a whole different game, than what you're doing. I mean, from what I understand, we won't go deep in this, but from what I understand about Peers is, I don't know if it's changed, but when the agency that I used to work at was doing it, Peers was not about the girls or the kids in the group making friends with each other. It was about teaching them to go out and make friends in their communities. Right. And it was a lot less about connecting those particular folks together.
Yeah.
I think some of that connection happens, but yours really focuses on, that relationship between the girls as sort of the central piece that allows you to kind of do all these really cool things, which I think is just awesome.
Thanks, Ben.
Are you thinking PhD one day?
Oh,
no pressure.
I think right now I'm just trying to keep up with the demand and seeing how I can offer more groups to meet the needs, because I think there's definitely more and more girls that are being recognized and more families that are reaching out. So, yeah.
I just definitely think this girls group has the potential to be something, really replicable and replicatable. Is that the word? Maybe
sounds right.
And tomato. But you don't need to publish something to make something to be able to replicate something. So hopefully, listen to this, folks will reach out. I guess that'd be the last question. If folks wanted to kind of connect with you and learn a little bit more about what you're doing, what's the best way to kind of reach you?
I am on Facebook and Instagram with my with Gabrielle Stigant, or email. Can I give that one? Okay. Yeah. Gabrielle Stigant at shot.ca. So yes, I'm happy to share information and talk. This is what my passion project is right now. So
awesome.
Yes.
So awesome. Well, Gab, thanks so much for coming on. It's been super awesome. I know I've learned a ton, not only from all the great readings you gave me, but from this discussion. And I look forward to, other folks getting stuff out of this. It's been super cool.
Well, thanks so much, Ben. I appreciate being on the podcast and having the opportunity to talk about my girls groups.